there is no winning on social media because there's 5 billion people on social media and they all are having different experiences, and all those 5 billion people on social media are going to have some sort of opinion, and it makes it so much easier behind a keyboard versus in person to say something about somebody to somebody.
So I worry sometimes about kids who are, stuck on processed foods, whose brains aren't even fully online. I mean, in a different way,
Yeah.
like, neurologically. And then they're being influenced, and like, what does the future look like in these? It's just so necessary for people to wake up, get back to nature, use their phones productively, and move their bodies.
It was about a rescue dog, and I thought this was like the sweetest video. And I made a comment to my partner at the time about like a misspelling that he had in the sign, and this woman had written in as like, you're abusive to your partner, and then it was in that comment though that because up until that point I had spent a lot of time when I was making my content thinking about all the potential ways that someone might leave me hate about it.
Welcome to the Step It Up podcast. I am so delighted to be here with my beloved Penelope and our special guest, Hillary Billings. She is the CEO and founder of Attentioneers, and she is just an honored guest here. She is a friend, she is a colleague, and she has taught me so much. So we're really happy to have you.
I'm so happy to be here with you guys. Thanks for having me. This is super fun.
In our living room.
In the living room.
Just hanging out.
Drinking the tea.
Oh, yeah.
Sipping the tea, drinking the tea at the same time.
Well, it's a pretty special tea.
Tell them what it is.
Oh my gosh, where should I start? Well, Tulsi tea is holy basil, and it has a number of different components that I've added to it, including cinnamon for blood sugar balance, since we just ate and we're not able to go for a walk. And it also has licorice in it, which will help to soothe our nervous systems. And it has chicory and carob for flavor, nutmeg as well for tonification.
I can taste the nutmeg.
It's strong today, and ginger to help with our digestion. Allspice for the well-roundedness and a little bit of heat. And there's something else in there. I can't remember what it is. I put so many. Oh, chaga and reishi, the king and queen of all medicinal mushrooms, to give us both that masculine-feminine balance.
I love how much you love food and recipes, and not just like, oh, this tastes really good, having this palette put together, but that there's this formula and you know every single thing as far as the health benefits that go with it. It's really powerful.
Thank you.
It makes you feel even better about eating and drinking the things that you create.
Oh,
I
Like,
agree.
not only does it taste and look amazing, but like, oh, it's gonna help all these amazing things and balance my feminine and masculine energy, and yay.
Well,
Let me drink more.
I've just been geeking out about it ever since I can remember, and a few things happened in my life that caused me to geek out about it, but thanks for the acknowledgement. Yeah, Penelope didn't always appreciate it so much.
She's like, will you just
true.
stop exposing on our food?
For so long, I didn't even eat her food. She'd like give me her food, and I'd be like, no, I don't want it. Like a literal child. Like my whole life, I acted that way.
I
Yeah,
think a lot of children do that, though.
Really?
Yeah, I think that's okay.
I feel like some kids really liked their mom's food. They were like excited when mom cooked.
Hmm.
I was not one of those kids.
Yeah, I think it depends.
no, you were just like, I was so confused. But you were one of my best critics,
Ah,
and you
there you
helped
go.
me to raise my level. Like, maybe if I make it better, she'll eat it this time. So that was a huge help, Penelope. So thank you for being one of my teachers in that
Did
way.
it ever work?
Yeah,
That's good.
absolutely.
Well, I guess it doesn't really even matter, right? Because at the end of the day, it was the motivation that kept you honing the skills of like, maybe one day she'll accept this, maybe one day she'll eat this. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, except for now I realize I was just being gaslit a lot of the time. And it's good. Like, the stuff I make is good, legit.
So good. It's so good.
At least you own it now.
I can own it a lot more now that she's
Yeah.
like, Mom, can you cook something for me,
I
please?
know. I'm begging you to cook for me.
I love cooking for you. Hillary, I really want to learn more about your journey of beauty and health.
Okay.
And some of you don't know, but Hillary is the former Miss Nevada.
I was one of those.
Yeah. So if anyone understands the complexity of body image and beauty, I mean, it's every woman and some men. But, I think, Hillary, you've got a journey that I'd love to learn more about.
Totally. Where should we start? How far back do we want to go in this time capsule?
Well, you had mentioned to me that you never even conceived of yourself being in a beauty pageant. Like, it was the furthest thing from your imagination.
Totally.
And so prior to that, though, I think you revealed that your mother was a model.
She was. She was a model actually here in LA. My dad and her actually met on a sound stage. She was walking out, he was walking in, he turned around, walked right back out to go and say hi to her. But she used to model for big designers, and in fact, Bob Mackie designed her wedding gown, which was really incredible. But yeah, so I grew up with a model in the family. And then my mom unfortunately got multiple sclerosis when I was very young. And so it was an interesting turn of events for me to see how that impacted her, and also just really recognizing that I wanted to always make sure that I had things in my life to support me regardless of my health status. And like I didn't know and what unknowns would come my way, and so how could I make sure that I didn't have to rely on my looks, or that was something that just felt really important to me. And when I got into college, I decided to get my degree in psychology, and I actually had a big interest in body image and eating disorders, and I had worked a little bit as a model at this time, and I just thought it was so fascinating. I think I'd done a shoot for Italian Vogue magazine, and you're working with these beautiful women and young girls, probably 14 or 15, right, that are being shot in these magazines to tell other women this is the standard of beauty that you need to look like, and they themselves maybe aren't very healthy, and in fact they could be very sick. And I just thought it was so interesting that regardless of where you were in Western society, there was something that you didn't like about yourself, and you had some sort of body dissatisfaction. And because of the way that the media, or just even the way we talk to ourselves, we're constantly always battling these inner critics. I just found it super fascinating. So I wanted to get my degree specifically in eating disorders and body image. And then I was the #1 graduate from my university. They gave me a special award for being so academically inclined, I guess.
Wow.
And then I went on to be the proud recipient of 14 rejection letters from every graduate school program that I applied to.
Oh my, I guess it just wasn't in your cards.
One of them even was addressed to somebody else, and they had crossed out their name and handwritten in my name, and they misspelled it. So you want to talk about like reaching a low of I'm not even worth having my own rejection letter, and really having that impact my life. So I did what any like dejected person would do at that point in time, and I took off to Nicaragua and started a travel blog. And
Took up surfing.
yeah, and just decided to start writing about my experiences. And then that quickly snowballed into having these conversations with people all over the world about how life didn't look the way that they thought it was going to. And as I was writing about the same thing, it was just interesting how those struggles allowed us a point of connection, and that even though the details were different, it was the same disappointment in that, hey, we were told if we do X, Y, or Z, we're going to get this. And that was no longer the case anymore. So I thought that I'd really hit the stride. I had readers in like 130 countries. And I had met one of my best friends now, and she was really emphatic, like, you should get into pageantry. You'd be an amazing beauty queen. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm smart. I've got ambitions. Like, I'm not interested. And it was really interesting that she's like, no, I think you'd be really great at this. And I took off to Fiji. And I went and had this beautiful, mystical, month-long experience living with the Firewalker tribe that claims to be the originators of the practice of walking on hot coals. Tony Robbins actually learned firewalking from them and integrated that into his events. And so I just gotten back from that, and I was really struggling to just acclimate to society. And it was 4th of July. So I was invited to a friend's 4th of July party. And it was one of those things where everything that could have gone wrong did. And it was almost like someone was telling me not to go. I couldn't find my keys. I broke a glass. I stepped on the glass. And this is going to sound like really hokey, but I was house sitting. And so I didn't have all my clothes. And I was really mad because I couldn't find the bra that I wanted to wear. So I ended up wearing this super padded push-up Victoria's Secret bra, and it's like really uncomfortable, and I'm just really irritated about it. But it was that or no bra, so I was like, I'm just like so frustrated, and go to the event. And we're all sitting around in lawn chairs, and someone lights off the first firework of the night. Everyone's talking, and then the fuse goes up, but nothing happens. And so everyone gets quiet because we know that means that there's something wrong with the firework, but no one's going to touch it because it's a live firework. So we're all just waiting to see what happens next. And the firework explodes and goes kaboom, but not in a pretty way. And so the thing's just malfunctioning, on fire, and the fuse, which is on fire, is traveling through the air, and it whips around and takes this very weird angle, and then it comes back and it hits my sunglasses and goes down my shirt. And so I ended up suffering 2nd and 3rd degree burns to my chest and my stomach, and it actually was the blessing that I had that super padded, annoying Victoria's Secret bra on, because it just ate through the whole thing. And if it hadn't been there, I don't actually know what the damage would have been, but it probably would have been much more horrific. So at that point, everything changed in my life, because doctors didn't know what my healing time would look like. They didn't know if I would look normal. The chest is the slowest healing part of the body. And all these surf trips, everything that I had planned for the fall, like, went out the window. And I was so embarrassed. I was weirdly embarrassed by this thing that I had no control over that had happened. And I felt a lot of shame around it. So I didn't tell any of my followers, any of my readers about it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, now that I look back on it, it was that I just, like, I wanted to pretend like it hadn't happened while I was, like, mentally battling with my idea of femininity and what it meant to be beautiful. And, like, would a male ever find me attractive again? And would I find myself attractive again? And how would I grapple with that? And so for 6 months, I'm just holed up in healing and kind of going through this process. And then I was hired actually for a modeling event at New Year's Eve, and it was this, like, Bond girl event. So you're in some slinky black dress, and I was so excited about it. And, like, I turned around and I looked at myself in the mirror, and all I could just see were my scars.
Yeah.
And I just immediately started crying, but I was so tired of being in that space. And it's like, okay, what do I need to do to move on from this elaborate pity party that I'm throwing for myself? Because now it's been 6 months, and I'm over it. I'm tired of feeling this way, and I want to have a different relationship. So I really started to think about what could I do that would allow me the opportunity to move past this. And in the blog, I talked a lot about putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, finding a way to make them comfortable as a way to find self-growth, particularly related to travel. But I figured if it worked there, it should work somewhere else in my life. So what else could that look like? And the answer that I got back was nothing sounded more terrifying than being on stage in a bikini and having someone judge me based upon my appearance. So I entered a beauty pageant, and it was the most insane roller coaster ride that I've probably ever been on. I did not enjoy any part of leading up to the pageant. I was so anxious. I had dreams about being naked on stage and, like, tripping over something. And it was just, there was so much anxiety about doing this thing, but I just really forced myself through the process. And I kept telling myself, you'll get a good blog article about it. Just go in. You're just going to get a good story. Just go in for the story. And then I accidentally won.
I don't know if it was an accident.
Well, it's interesting because I think I learned so much about pageantry. And particularly at that time, the way that the categories were broken down was that there's 4. There's interview, on-stage question, swimsuit, and evening gown. And so everyone's going to look great in an evening gown. Swimsuit, like, it kind of depends upon the person or what the judge is looking for, right? But half your score, everything is evenly cut across the board. Half your score is talking. And so I think a lot of women don't think about that when they're going into pageantry.
She got the strategy down for the pageant.
It's like half your score is about, can you speak, and can you speak well, and how do you handle yourself under pressure? How do you handle yourself in a media interview? And really, like, when you think about it, it's a job description. Like, how are you going to show up? It's probably some modeling. Like, how are you going to be at events? Can you handle yourself with composure? Do you have a media interview? And so once I started relating to it in that way, it became more palatable. The other cool thing about pageantry is that it's one of the few places that requires, in order to compete and to be eligible to compete, that you have something called a platform, which is a nonprofit or an organization that you support, that you volunteer with, that you're there to lend your voice to help lift up. And so many beauty queens work with numerous ones over the course of their titles, but everyone's required to have one, and they want you to have a personal connection to it. So I chose the Southern Nevada Firefighters and the Burn Foundation because they do so much amazing work with helping children and families that have been hurt in a fire or lost everything in a fire, children that are burn survivors, letting them go to burn camp so they can just be kids and just enjoy. And it's actually still an organization that I'm very heavily involved with. I'm still their burn ambassador today. And it was one of the greatest joys of my year was getting to work with them and the Burn Institute and Camp Beyond the Scars and all of the organizations. I think I did like 400 apperances.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of appearances.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So you're super comfortable on stage.
Yeah, well, once I got the title, the beautiful thing about that experience, which we don't often get in life, is that there was a time limit on it. And I knew the time, like everything in life has time limits on it. We just don't usually get to know what the time limit is, like how long we're going to be in that relationship, how long we're going to be in that house, how long we're going to live in a city. And so it was one of the few times it's like, you have a year. What are you going to do with that in a year? And I wanted to take off that sash and crown and have them be ratty and dirty and covered in makeup and tanner and just completely disgusting because I had worn it so well and I had taken, I didn't want to have any regrets about it. And that's what I would see happen a lot in pageantry is that girls wouldn't use the time, and so they would feel like they need to get back into it, or there would be regrets or want to do it again. And there's a lot of reasons that women would come back and compete again, but that was the one that I saw most often, is that they didn't feel like they really utilized it to the best of their ability. And so it was really fun to just like, I exhausted myself. I was so ready to turn it over by the end. I'm like, someone else take it. I'm done. I did it. And
Nice.
it was beautiful.
Nice.
We had triple the number of entries the next year.
That's an inspiration. Wow.
Yeah.
Hillary, that's incredible. So Penelope had done some research about body positivity. Our audience knows that we think a lot about body positivity because it influenced Penelope's story. And you found out that it was originally...
Well, it's so interesting that you were, that whole story is very fascinating to me
Yeah.
because body positivity originated from people who were burn victims or people who were born without legs or arms or eyes or noses, like just like even people who have gone in wars and had their limbs blown off. And then it turned into this thing where it was like, oh, now if you're overweight by choice, if you're overweight, then you immediately are, part of the body positivity community. Like, we love you, we accept you, we're for you. Like, it's healthy to be overweight and it's totally fine. And it discredits like all the body positivity that we were giving to the people who didn't have limbs, who actually deserved the sympathy and empathy and compassion that we gave them for them not being able to change how they, what happened to them. But then we kind of gave it to people who kind of could control their circumstances and could, maybe change the way they are, and they weren't born that way. And so I think it's really interesting that, you were in this position, and I'm curious what your thoughts may be around body positivity.
In what way specifically?
Like, in today's definition of body positivity,
Yeah.
what's your perspective around it, especially with your background?
Gosh, I don't know if I've spent enough time like researching it or really thinking about it to have like a fully formed opinion. I think that there's always going to be, extremes of everything, and well-intentioned inclusion on any front is potentially going to lead to another consequence of some sort. I think that goes with anything. Even in the world of social media that I exist in now and you exist in now, right? Like even the content that you feel is maybe the most harmless or meant to be the most inspirational, someone else may take issue with it or take umbrage with it for some reason or another. I don't know if I've been as aware to that aspect of it as I have on the other end of the spectrum, where I think everyone gets served different types of content on social media. And what I typically see, which might just be because of who I'm following or my interests, I typically see the other side of it, where you have women who are very beautiful, who are potentially very, very sick, that are too skinny, and that's being glorified in a lot of ways. And then there's also a lot of reprimanding, not necessarily for people just commenting on their appearance, but people that are even have concern for them, their followers, their friends, being like, hey, we really care about you, and we're really concerned. Now I get like it comes down to what's the best medium to do all these things. But I think, yeah, we're in such an interesting age of everyone having very strong opinions about everything.
Yeah.
Well, this is true body positivity, what you experienced. Your courage,
Oh,
your courage to step into a pageantry with the burns. I mean, that's incredible. And the fact that you won on top of it, just the courage to do it, let alone the fact that you won. I mean,
Thank
it's
you.
a huge accomplishment and a testament to your character
Oh, thank you.
and your courage.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't, there's a lot happening right now in the Miss USA system where they've changed a lot of the rules, and there's actually a lot of women that are really upset about it because they feel like it's taken down a peg the prestige of becoming Miss USA or a Miss America. Like in the Miss USA system now, there's no age limits, and I believe that you can be transgender, and I believe that you can have had a child, and you can be divorced, and so there are some title holders that are saying that that makes it less impactful, and I don't know if we know the answers to those things, or if that. I don't know if that would fall under what you're talking about as far as body positivity.
Well, I mean, what
Maybe
if
it's more around ageism.
what if Miss USA or Miss
I was just
California
gonna think
was obese? You know, how, that would be shocking.
Especially because almost 80% of America is overweight or obese.
Is it really that high?
It is. It's that high.
Oh my goodness.
And 1 in 3 children are obese today.
Is the primary culprit, is it food? Is it lack of exercise? Is it
Absolutely both.
sedentary?
It's said that it's ultra processed food because 100 years ago there was no processed food. And when they look at Japan, for example, that only has 3 to 4% obesity for children, they're protected from ultra processed food. And they estimate that 70% of children's calories come from ultra processed foods. So we are absolutely in a situation in our culture where we need to pay attention to this.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like child abuse. And I was blindsided by it. I mean, I didn't give Penelope ultra processed food, but she was getting it at her schools. Dr. Lustig calls elementary schools the #1 fast food chain, largest, and most popular, in the country.
Sure.
And these kids are basically on an IV of toxins and chemicals and ultra-processed foods that make them great pharmaceutical customers for life. It's the commoditization of health, and it's a problem, I think, for our future.
It's so interesting. I mean, the only thing that I can speak to on that is I also know within school systems, because of the fact that there are children who are not getting meals at home, there are certain caloric and carb requirements that they have to meet because they have to assume in school lunches that might be the only meal that the kid is getting.
Of course,
every
I
day.
get that. Yeah.
It's super interesting. Or how do we solve for both, right?
Well, then it gets to the point, should our government get involved? What happened to the family unit? The contracts for the schools are very high value.
Totally.
And the kitchens of schools are not kitchens. They're mechanisms for unpackaging and defrosting food. I mean, so there's a whole supply chain that I think has gotten really far away from what nature intended, and therefore also health. So you studied eating disorders in college.
I did.
That's
yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
And what I find even more interesting, and you might know something about this, there's this study that shows if you deprive people of certain foods, that they have more of a propensity to binge and purge. And that's the body of science that dictates a lot of the eating disorder facilities, including McLean's and a number of the most notable ones internationally.
Yeah.
And yet, so we see a lot of things on social media about people recovering from their eating disorders by eating McDonald's and having milkshakes and French fries and pizza and donuts. And Penelope and I are always like, oh no, because come to find out, because I have not only a bachelor's and a master's degree in nutrition, but I've also studied nutritional psychology, which is fascinating.
I bet.
And there's over 3,000 studies now, and every day there are more coming online about the nature of the neurobiology of eating. So there's physiological, there's neurological. And there's another body of science in the nutritional psychology world where if you eat food that is ultra processed, or you eat foods that are highly palatable, that are really high in salt, fat, and sugar, that also can create the neurobiology of an addict, and you become addicted. And so I find it really interesting that it's almost oppositional. So on the one side, the top doctors and psychologists and even psychiatrists are telling you to recover from your eating disorder by eating donuts and ultra processed food because they want you to get over it and not binge and purge. And yet you're not really setting up your physiology or your neurology, your brain or your body for success. So you're creating this opposition. So I don't know if you have any insight into eating disorders and like best practices, or if you yourself have experience or you've witnessed it from friends or family members.
Best practices. I mean, everybody's their own animal with that. I did work, I interned at an eating disorder treatment clinic and sat through a lot of group therapy sessions with women and some men as well, right? I think it's more often to be something that we see recorded in women, but it still happens in men. I will say we would do these these meal challenges, or we would take them as part of treatment to go to a restaurant, and each restaurant presented a different type of challenge. So we would go to a Grimaldi's, a pizzeria, and it's like, okay, everyone's got to order pizza, and we can order salad and whatever you want, but part of that is like in certain eating disorders, there's a lot of fear around certain types of food. We would go to the Cheesecake Factory because of the length and just the volume of the menu, and having to make a decision based upon the fact that there's so many choices, when that's something that can be really overwhelming for people. Again, this was very early on in my career, so I'm not specific to or know about what they're saying on social media about this now, but my guess would be that it's because when you think about an eating disorder, like the biggest challenge is overcoming the mental game with it. And so if you're afraid of or avoiding or restricting against these foods, we need to remove that as being something that you feel guilt or shame or are going to self-criticize about. And how do we allow your nervous system to regulate while having this in your life? And so that it doesn't need to be so catastrophic. That would be my guess as to why they would do that way.
For sure. Yeah. But I don't know. I feel horrible if I eat cheesecake.
Totally.
I mean, I feel like wrecked.
Yeah.
And I don't think that helps me like love myself more. I mean, just me personally.
Well, online, there's a really, really big, like, they kind of like miss the mark on what you're saying, because what you're saying is really different from what social media is now kind of saying. Like, even dietitians are going online and they're like, it's okay to drink Coca-Cola. It's totally fine. And I think in the way you're explaining it, I could in some world understand why you would say, oh, drinking Coca-Cola is fine. It's not going to kill you. But in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, but like it could kill you if you drink too many of them. You know what I mean? And it's like.
Well, let me ask you this, because you and I have talked about, and I'm sure you shared with your viewers that you used to love pizza.
Yeah.
And so, what was it for you? Because at a point in time, it was like a forbidden food, and then something shifted for you. So, what shifted for you to allow it to be okay, and then to allow it to be something that you didn't want anymore?
Well, what's interesting is for me, I took this approach that me and my mom are really like into, which is like, I don't eat that kind of pizza anymore. I make one that is life-giving and helps my body and gives me energy and doesn't take energy away from me and doesn't have harmful chemicals that the industry has created and now put in food. Does that make sense?
Totally. And so what I think I'm hearing both of you say, and I think even in my own journey of like acceptance of my body and trying to navigate all of that, I think the first piece is just acceptance of what is, and like that, hey, you like pizza, and hey, it's okay to like pizza, and liking pizza doesn't need to be a problem, and hey, it's okay for you to eat ice cream, and it's okay for you to want a burger, and it's okay to, and just getting the initial acceptance so you can stop being up against that point of resistance. And then I think once you're in acceptance with that, then it's okay, now how do I want to move forward differently to actually support myself, and what feels good for me, right? Because for what supports my body might look different than yours, or what I'm willing to negotiate on. Like, and I've talked about it. I love coffee. I'm going to always drink lattes, but maybe I'm in a place in my life now where it's like, okay, I want to have a different experience with drinking coffee. I'm not going to stop drinking coffee, but maybe I don't want to be exposed to heavy metals anymore. And maybe I'm willing to look at different types of milks because I want them to fortify my body instead of having to deal with seed oils or anything else. So how can that be something that's actually nourishing? But it's taken me 30 plus years to do that, right? And so, and even just getting to the point where I don't need to make myself wrong for wanting that thing. And so if I had to guess, not being as familiar with this type of content, would be that a lot of people struggle with just the acceptance. So they live in avoidance of their own shame. They live in avoidance of the action that they really want to take. And because of that, they're just stuck in that being the fixation. And so what I imagine that is like well-intentioned with a lot of this content is let's just get people to accept what is. And then we can figure out, once the acceptance is there, how we want to move through it in a different capacity. But that's, again, without being familiar.
That's perfect. That's
like,
exactly
It's
it.
true. It's true, but
She's so brilliant. I love it.
so true, and I do see it playing out in too much of an extreme in cases where
Totally.
I'm like, oh my gosh, like you're telling these overweight women, for example, to eat pizza in however much they want, and it's not even helping them. And of course, some of the, basically everyone who's obese almost has some kind of eating disorder, like I did. But I'm not like I had people telling me it was okay to eat more of the foods, and it just made me gain more weight and keep feeding my addiction. And so in that sense, it wasn't a helpful tool of like, oh, it's okay to eat the pizza. Don't be scared of the pizza. It's like, oh, I'm not scared of it. I'm in love with it. You know what I mean? And so, of course, like anorexia is different, and I get that. But I just think that in that community, you have like these professionals who are experienced in eating disorders, but they're telling any size to just go in on that pizza, go in on that granola, go in on the ice cream, and it's like,
And we're doing the same thing actually, but we're making pizza out of sprouted buckwheat.
exactly, which is why when you
delicious.
asked me, I was like, oh, I make it out of buckwheat because we and you have taught me the nutrition, which has then taught me why I can have pizza, but in that way.
Because it shifted your taste buds, it shifted your gut microbiome, it shifted your neurology. And like if you were to eat that pizza, it would actually make you feel sick.
Exactly. And the same thing with ice cream. It's like, yes, Penelope, you're going to have ice cream made out of bananas, made out of zucchini. You know what I mean? And it's
Or
just
even
like
made out of coconut cream.
yeah, but the dietitians and the experts aren't saying that on the media, which I find
No
interesting.
sugar. Yeah, no, please no sugar.
Please no sugar.
Please no cane sugar.
Because it's more addictive than cocaine. And so why do we have experts telling people to eat sugar when it's more addictive than cocaine? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I wonder, again, like without being familiar with them, I wonder if it's just too big of an animal to push up against, where it's like, okay, if we know we're going to lose the war, if we know that we're not going to be able to get people to agree to not want these things, then how do we get them to make small shifts, or what does that look like so we can be on a path to being healthy? I know a conversation that would come up a lot in the treatment clinics is like, what is a calorie, right? And like, what does that really mean? And is it such a thing as what are empty calories, right? And how do we start to eat more nutritious calories that are better for us? But usually even the things that they're fixated on, or they were fixated on at the time, were very specific, right? And so how do you, I guess, just how do you start to move the needle into a place where like the narrative that they're telling themselves from the get-go can actually rescind back so something else can be possible?
Yeah, it is a big, big, big animal to unpack and to tame and to like and to make friends with.
Gosh,
It's
and
big.
that's the hard thing about eating disorder. And the thing that I think actually really frustrates me the most is that with eating disorders, once someone has decided that they want to actually get healthy, or they're ready to move away from that, there really isn't necessarily a cure. And it's average of 8 years once they are committed to going to treatment that they'll actually start to really feel like it doesn't own their lives anymore. And that's really difficult, especially when it's one of the number one killers of for people on the mental side of things. But it never gets listed as the reason why someone died of heart failure. Okay, well, why do they have heart failure at 21?
Yeah.
Well, they had heart failure at 21 because they weren't eating.
Yeah,
right?
no, it's so true.
It's such a complicated and also just like how the people around you are supporting you. I mean, it all comes back to worthiness, right?
Yeah.
And also discernment, because I think even when it comes to food and how I related to food in the past is like, does it taste good? Is it serving an emotion? You know, I'm bored, right? And you even see it, my dog was the same way. Like if he was more engaged, he wanted to eat less. And on the days where he didn't have a lot going on, he was just really curious what I was going to let him snack on. And I think that we use food in a lot of ways to self-soothe.
Sure.
And so it's such a complicated issue. And then the mentality that will go into it too, and those narratives. So I think people want to be helpful with removing the initial narrative. And I think for so long there was an ostracization. Is that the right word?
Ostracization?
Is
Ostracization?
that the word?
Ostracism.
For for obese people. And so I understand like wanting it's anything in society, right? We go from a pendulum on one side to the other, and then we'll eventually come back to a healthy medium of what does that look like?
Eventually, yeah. I mean, my mom was morbidly obese. So contrary to your mother, who was a model, but I think they may have had similar issues. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows?
But I do think the pendulum does have to swing, but unfortunately, I'm not sure it's swinging in a healthy way. I don't think that Ozempic is a solution because just like you're saying, Ozempic isn't really building the skill. It's an injection, and apparently when you go off it, it's really challenging because that root cause that you were just talking about being the necessity to address is not being addressed. But it is on track to be one of the most profitable drugs ever known to humanity.
Wow.
Yeah. So speaking of animals, somehow you got led to be the co-founder of Attentioneers.
Speaking of animals, because it's a beast. Yeah. I like that segue.
Well, clearly you're brilliant, and you understand how society works, how psychology works. Your courage, clearly, that you've demonstrated a number of times, and your resilience. And Attentioneers is a really important topic because, as we know, your world is never going to watch television ever. So things are changing rapidly. And now you were educating me that the number one job that people want is to become an influencer.
Yeah, when you ask kids what they want to be when they grow up, the number one answer is no longer rock star or actress, it's influencer. It's the number one.
That's crazy. I believe it though.
And in fact, social media is now right. Like it used to be that parents were having to fight against their kids to stop gaming, right? Like video games were now video games are losing out to social media, and they're struggling to figure out how they can keep audiences. It's really interesting to see where everything's pointing to that short form video on digital media is the new frontier of content. And in fact, I think Goldman Sachs released a projection that in the next 3 years, we are going to double the amount of money being poured into the creator economy than we've done in the last 17 years.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I've been really overwhelmed by it.
It's overwhelming. Yeah.
Just interested in it and, just frustrated by it. Whereas Penelope is like totally fascinated by it, and she's taught me so much, and so have you, frankly. And so what was your motivation to be the co-founder of Attentioneers? And tell me more about it.
Well, I think like everything in my life, it's been kind of an accident. So Attentioneers is we're an agency that helps personal brands and entrepreneurs to grow their reach and revenue through short form video strategies specifically. But it's all about the psychology of attention. How do we help you make content that your audience cares about and you're not going to cringe at? And so that it really aligns and brings together your authentic personal brand. And, this was born out of me and my co-founder accidentally became viral content creators. So going back after I was a travel writer and after being Miss Nevada, or while I was Miss Nevada, USA Today called and they asked if I'd be interested in being one of their reporters and journalists. So I started doing hundreds of articles and was a red carpet host and did a lot of on-camera interviews. And that was so interesting too, because even just seeing like confidence and body image in that capacity and like interviewing all these people that we all idolize. And it was just very interesting to see those dynamics playing out too. And then I ended up moving into personal branding and helping billionaires and entrepreneurs and all sorts of people to find their messaging and help them with book launches. And I really loved it so much. And then COVID hit and all the revenue streams dried up. So I was approached by an acquaintance of mine who happened to run the largest network of Facebook watch pages. Now, at this time, you couldn't monetize on Facebook or Instagram without having a publisher. So it was a lot like traditional record label of like you have the label will give you the deal, and then you can make money and become a star from there. And otherwise, it was near impossible. So he asked if we'd be interested in starting a page, and it's like, well, I have a lot of background in making content online, and I feel like I know what people want to hear. And we saw a lot of influencers doing really well. My co-founder was a professional touring musician, so we're like, why not? Let's make 3-minute videos. How hard could this be? turns out it was really hard. And it was absolutely demoralizing. We spent 9 months banging our heads against a wall, trying to get content to work, couldn't get a single video to take off. And it was so frustrating. You just watch and see these other influencers, you're making similar content and theirs is just blowing up and yours isn't. And you start to take it really personally and you're like, is it me? Am I the problem? Does no one want to watch me do the thing? And you start to just think maybe it doesn't work for you. So we hit this point of we either have to figure this out or we have to be done because we're losing money now trying to be content creators. And so we decided to ask a different question because at the time it was just so infuriating. Like you just see this video, it's like someone picked up their phone and just started filming something, they posted it, it goes viral. Ugh. It was like, what if the virality that we thought was accidental was actually really intentional? And what if we just didn't know what that formula was? What if we didn't know what was a part of making that happen? So we took a weekend and decided to watch thousands of viral videos, which I don't recommend doing for your mental health. And we made a spreadsheet of everything that's happening. What are all the potential factors? Because we didn't know what might actually be the thing that's causing the video to do well. So we kept track of what was happening at second 1 and second 3 and second 5, and what are they wearing, and what are they saying, and what are the hand gestures, and what platform is it on, and how long is it? And it was almost like, what's that movie? John Nash in A Beautiful Mind, where like the numbers and patterns start to emerge. And we took those learnings and we applied it to our next video. And that next video did 5 million views. And the video after that did 10 million views. And it's not to say that everything that we touched turned to gold, but roughly 1 in every 4 of our videos did over 1 million, 1 in every 10 did over 10 million. And we went from no views in the first 9 months to 1 billion organic views in the following 12 months. We grew my TikTok following from 0 to 400,000 in 40 days, which it's not that easy anymore, but that was really fantastic. And we built a career as viral content creators and then saw a need and a desire. And, I came from the personal branding space and we saw so many personal brands. We saw so many small businesses. We saw so many companies that were desperately trying to get out in front of their audiences and had no way of knowing how to do it. And so we created Attentioneers to help that because we really didn't want to gatekeep. We wanted to give people success. I think there's space for all of us. And I think it's leveraging your uniqueness and finding ways of using the formula and the components that need to be in each video to be able to make great content that people want to engage with. And especially now when there's so much content and 20 million new videos being posted every day to the internet.
20 million.
And attention spans have decreased by 25% in the last 10 years. And we're expecting the creator economy to double in the next 3 years.
So then what? Like, what's the future then hold for people to make a difference?
Yeah, I think especially as AI generated content comes into play, I think it's all going to lean more and more heavily on humanity and personal connection and personal story. And that's, viewers are now so discerning when it comes to what they want to watch, and they can tell right away if you're being authentically yourself or not. They can tell if you're humorous or want to do challenges, or if you're funny, or if you're doing this dance because you feel like you have to, or because that's really a part of who you are. And because they're being served so much content every day, and you will know in 2 seconds whether or not you're going to keep watching.
And your whole generation, I think, is like that too.
It is.
Yeah, and so it's becoming more and more important that people look at attention as earned and not deserved. And so that's what we really help people to do is like, how do you start looking at your content in a very intentionally engineered way? And it's been really fun. We've helped clients 250x their results, and I love getting to help people figure out how to package up their messages in a way that are consumable for others.
It is a science and an art, and I didn't realize it until I met you and I attended your workshop, and you were able to give me some feedback and advice. So it's really profound.
Thank
So if
you.
people want to learn more about Attentioneers, where can they go?
Yeah, so the best place is to go get our free viral video blueprint. It's attentioneers.com/blueprint. And that will help you get started to see where in the process you're getting stuck and how you can start to remove that resistance. So we, on the first day, send you our 40 tried and true hooks that will help you to start make authentic content. We've got our ChatGPT prompts that are tried and tested for us to help you be able to script out your content. And then we have our Notion workflow template. So if there's a particular part of the production process that you're getting stuck, it'll help you to work all that out. Attentioneers.com/blueprint.
You're so up to date. You're using Notion.
Oh yeah,
I love that.
I use Notion for a lot of things. I'm still learning it, but yes,
Me
I know
too.
Notion.
I'm still learning it too. Also,
ChatGPT, all the things.
as a 19-year-old who's been in the social media world, I can also say that your course is amazing.
Thank Thank
and that your
you.
trainings were amazing. I learned so much,
Aw.
and I thought I knew a lot.
You do know a lot.
I thought I knew a lot, but then you taught me even more.
It's so cool when the 19-year-old endorses you, right? You know you're doing something right.
Yeah, and she's really been studying it. At 16, or was it 15, she made this beautiful proposal to be my social media manager. And she brought me this like 14-page, very well-designed proposal. And I'm looking through it, I'm like, wow, this is really impressive. I'm thinking to myself, I didn't help her at all with this. Like, really incredible. And then it like gets to the last page, and it's like $1,400 for a month. And I was like, Penelope, this is amazing. Thank you so much for this proposal. And I said, I would be willing to, you could test me as your test client, but I'm not going to pay you this much. Like nowhere near, I'm not even going to pay you half this much.
Yeah.
And she was so sweet. She was just like, looked at me and she smiled. And then she just very gently like took her proposal back, closed it, and she said, thank you for your time. And then she turned around and she walked out of the room. And I was like, oh, damn, like she is such
Did you have that plan that you're like, if she says no or she asks me for less money, I'm going to walk away?
Probably. Honestly, I was
ballsy.
really like gun ho on that price, and like I wasn't gonna do anything other than
What were
that.
you going to do with that money?
I don't know. Probably. At that point, I think I wanted to save it for real estate at the time.
Of course, like any 14-year-old does.
She wants her investment properties.
She's ready.
That's true.
She's like, Mom, did you know about compound interest? I'm like, I do.
Oh my
And she's like, I
gosh.
got to get started.
You're so cool. That's so fun.
So, one of my questions for you, Hillary, is what is the #1 secret to going viral?
The #1 secret for, oh my gosh, there's so many. Okay, well, there's 3 things that need to happen in each video in order for it to have a chance to go viral. And so what we typically see is that if someone's had a piece of content that has done well, it's because it incorporates these 3 components. And if they poured their heart and soul into it and it hasn't, it's because these 3 things are missing. So the first one is that it has to grab attention, which seems incredibly like a no-duh moment, but a lot of people don't really think about that because they're so focused on what happens at the end of the video and saying something like, oh, I had this amazing message, there's this big plot twist. But the reality is 99.9% of people will not get to the end of the video. Most people won't get through 15 seconds of your video. We would spend more time focused on the first 3 seconds of a video than anything else because we knew that if we didn't get their attention, much like if you can't get someone to pick up your book at Barnes & Noble or even on Amazon because of the title, they're never going to be able to read it. So if you don't grab attention and you're not thinking about that, nothing else you do matters. So that's the first piece. It has to grab attention. It needs to spark an emotion because emotion is how we connect to the stories, and emotions are also what get us to share. So BuzzFeed did a bunch of research on this about their most viral pieces of content, and they found that if it triggered an emotion, it was more likely to allow someone to have an engagement response. And depending upon what emotion you were triggering, determined what type of engagement you get. So depending upon if you want someone to be outraged or if you want them to feel warm and fuzzy will really determine what behavior they'll take after watching the piece of content. And then finally, you have to create a curiosity gap. So you need to tell the viewer what they're going to learn, but you're going to leave something out. So this could be the top 3 ways to go viral, and we're going to learn the top 3 things, and that's the curiosity gap is fulfilling in on that thing, or it's the #1 way to insert blank here, and then you're going to learn that #1 way, or the biggest mistake that someone makes when, and then you're going to learn that biggest mistake. So by setting it up with that context, the viewer is immediately going to know whether or not it applies to them, and then it's also going to get you that watch time. It's going to get them to stick around until the end because now they're committed because they care about the final result. If you don't give them the curiosity gap, they won't know what they're waiting for. And so then that becomes really difficult to keep people's attention because unless they know what they're waiting for, they don't want to waste their time and they'll just keep going. So those are the three things that you can start thinking about with your content to help it have a chance for virality. Grab attention, spark an emotion, create a curiosity gap.
I love it. It's amazing.
Thank you.
There's so many things that I wanted to talk about, but because you got your eye on social media and engagement and attention, we were talking earlier about comments, and you brought up a really interesting point
There's
that
a lot of them.
Yeah, but that even if like if you're skinny, you're also getting a lot of comments that are about your body and about your image. And it's like you can't win.
You can't win.
Either you're going to be objectified as a woman, or they're going to say you're too skinny, or you're too pale, or are you okay?
You're overly objectified. Yeah.
And or if you're overweight, you're going to have like, comments about that. And I just was interested in the psychology of that, because is the algorithm intelligent enough to be able to notice the positive or the negative? I don't think it is. I think it just notices if there's comments. I don't think they care if it's positive or negative. I'm sure there's some things on their radar that like about certain topics that we're not allowed to even talk about here, or we'll get canceled. So there is an AI bot like going around like censoring content. I don't know, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. So you think that AI can tell the difference between positive and negative attention?
We know that they do, based upon our time working and with Meta, that was something that came into play. That they'll be able to, based upon the comments, determine the overall tonality of the content. So a lot of things, the AI is looking at a lot of things, and AI is not perfect. And I think that there's a lot of things that get caught in AI that shouldn't be caught, but I don't know necessarily if like AI has it out for certain people, but we've been subjected to having AI catch content or say that it's doing certain things when it wasn't the case. But it's a computer, it's not a person, and it's trying to figure something out. So it's looking at a lot of things, everything from starting with what's happening in the imagery. And so if there's something that's mismatched, it'll usually start to throttle. Like if you have someone in a bikini, but they're not near a body of water, that's a problem, because then it could potentially be objectification. What if that person's underage, right? It's looking for, if the AI can't see what's happening in the video, it's going to limit the number of views because it's trying to protect younger viewers. And so if it can't determine or register anything on the imagery, it doesn't know what's happening in the background, and that's a big concern for platforms. So that might get throttled. Then it's looking at what are the titles, what are the captions, what's being said in the video, what's in the description. And all those things will play into the AI being like, okay, I think I'm looking at a video about making a smoothie, so let me go over here and look at user behavior and see which of the users have recently watched content about smoothies or diet or health, or maybe it's a video about raccoons. Well, I know Hillary likes watching raccoon videos, but this one has a dog in it. But she recently watched 2 raccoons with a cat, so maybe she'd like a raccoon with a dog. And it's going to try to figure out like where are the barriers for the interest of a user and test on that. So that's the AI piece.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and so with that, I don't know how often it's being used in a lot of the different capacities now, but I do know that if you got more negative comments, that would not be positive for your page. And so there is some sort of mechanism, as far as I am understanding it, that come into play. And you can, right, as a creator, there's certain words that you can block, there's certain words that you can ban. But that's also really challenging, because then that might also pick up comments that don't actually include the words that you're trying to block out, and then you're limiting people in that way.
But we see some people who have like very, very edgy content, because it's like you have to be different enough to stand out.
Totally.
And if you're too different, then you get canceled, or you get shadow banned, or if that's even a thing. And then we also know some people who are doing some really edgy things and getting a lot of hate, but then they're getting millions and millions and millions of views, and their platforms are growing wildly. So like it doesn't add up. I just feel like it's the Wild West.
It is in a lot of ways, and that's the thing too, is like a lot of the platforms don't even, like we were on TikTok's advisory board, and even TikTok doesn't fully understand its algorithm. Like what they know is like, hey, we want more engagement in this type of way. And they'll put that in, and then the algorithm will find ways to make that happen or find content to serve that. But they don't really know what the algorithm is doing, or it's its own monster and its own beast. When it comes to like comments or hate in itself, and like, again, you can't win. Yeah, there is no winning on social media, because there's 5 billion people on social media, and they all are having different experiences, and all those 5 billion people on social media are going to have some sort of opinion, and it makes it so much easier behind a keyboard versus in person to say something about somebody to somebody. The thing that I thought was really interesting was even the content. When I was a full-time viral content creator, we made a lot of videos that were purely for virality. So pranks, wedding videos, recipe videos, feel-good videos, gifting videos, unboxing videos. So like very much Bored Panda, BuzzFeed style content, which was meant to be consumed by the masses. So when you're doing that type of content, you're not necessarily going for the most highbrow of or intellectual or something that's going to appeal to a niche audience. You're trying to appeal to a wide audience. So even then you're getting so many walks of life. And we did this one video and I was so proud of it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this feels so good. And this is such a sweet video. And it was like climbing up on all the views were climbing on every platform. And there were still people, it was about a rescue dog. And I thought this was like the sweetest video. And I made a comment to my partner at the time about like a misspelling that he had in the sign. And this woman had written in as like, you're abusive to your partner. And it was in that comment though, that because up until that point, I had spent a lot of time when I was making my content thinking about all the potential ways that someone might leave me hate about it. And I'd be like, what are all the things that someone could potentially say to me if I make this piece of content about it, or about me, or about my looks, or about how I'm acting, and or about the just the concept of the video in general. And I would try to buffer for that. But what an exhausting existence.
Yeah.
And like also could never, like there was so many new and inventive ways people have of like sharing hate online that I couldn't even imagine at the time. And so it was once I had this comment on a piece of content that I was really proud of, that I knew was giving a lot of people joy and also had a really positive message and serving the community in a positive way, I just realized, oh, like this has nothing to do with me. This has to do with her belief and her perception on what it means to be in a relationship or to be abusive. And in fact, this is her belief system. And then when I took that into the next video and I saw every comment that would come in, and there would be some that were really positive, and there'd be a lot more that would be very negative. Because here's the thing too, is that if you are, and this is just in content in general, as I've learned, if you're saying something that a lot of people agree with, there's not a lot of reason for them to engage with you.
Right.
So if you're saying something that's very controversial, or you are doing things wrong in a video or in a way that people don't appreciate or agree with, they're going to have something to say. And a lot of people just can't help themselves because they're so focused externally instead of focusing on themselves. So they need to tell someone else what to do. And it's really fascinating when you start to look at comments through the lens of what is the belief system that this person is operating from, because it becomes very clear as to where they are in their emotional journey and what matters to them. And I did a whole video on catcalling, and I had a family friend reach out to me and tell me that I had dressed too provocatively to do a video on catcalling. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. And it brings up a great discussion around, do women deserve to be catcalled regardless of what they wear? But again, I'm like, looking at it, it's like all I could see from her message wasn't that I had done something wrong, but that she had a belief that if women wore provocative clothing, they deserved to have that type of treatment. And that changed my world of, all we're doing is we're all just walking around with our own belief systems and trying to tell each other how to look at things our way. And so it really allowed me to take a step back and not take the comments as personally, even though they still hurt sometimes. And what typically happens is the ones that hurt the most are the ones where I have wounding. And so, being in my mid-30s now, I'm really struggling with, my body feels different, and I feel like I do makeup and I look older now, or I'm now in that first time where trends are coming back around and it's really giving me an existential crisis. It's like, oh my God, I remember when this was popular in the 90s. How are we here? How is music that I listen to now in the grocery store? And it's one of those interesting things where I feel myself getting older, and I have a lot of my own beliefs about what it means to get older, and how do I find worth, and how do I see myself through that process. And so the comments that feed into that right now are the ones that hurt me the most, because that's just where I am emotionally. But if someone was to be like, oh, Hillary's such a purple hippo, I'd be like, oh, okay, guess I'm a purple hippo. Like, it doesn't bother me. So I think it really says a lot about, like, when you get upset by a comment, there's probably something that's wounding for you there, or it's a nerve that really potentially is a belief that you have about yourself. And that's always something that I like to look at. And then otherwise, when I look at comments, I'm just really trying to be in this compassionate space of this is somebody else's belief system, and that's the only reason that they're doing this and they can be in this space.
Yeah, don't take it personally. I love that as just a general rule for life.
It's so hard.
Have compassion.
It's so hard.
Yeah, well, it is. I don't know. It is, but it's
Well,
working.
you're not really on social media, so it's probably easiest for you because you're just like, la, la, la.
No,
la.
what she does, I'm the one that gets all the comments, and then she'll see one and she'll be like, oh my gosh, Penelope, do I worry about this comment? And I'm like, Mom, we get like thousands of hate comments all the time. Like, it's fine. It's normal. We have one video that has 17.1 thousand comments on it, and it's basically all negative comments.
Yeah.
But I don't care because the negative comments have nothing to do with me, like you said. And they're basically just living their own belief system, and that's fine.
I think that when the printing press came out, it was a big deal, and there was
Yeah.
a lot of patriarchy. That there's a lot of backlash. There were a lot of problems
Yeah.
with people learning to read,
Yeah.
then reading, having their own opinions about what they had been taught. That maybe that was incorrect, and so on and so forth. And I feel like we're going through a similar. I don't know if we can call it a renaissance, but we are going through a similar period now with the internet in the 90s and now social media, and especially with your generation, so completely consumed by it. Earlier today, we were just talking about how, for me, and I don't probably also for you, but like my phone in that world is really separate from my real world, and I think it's merged now, and there are going to be major consequences of that, of which we're already seeing, where education is
Totally.
being valued differently. Online programming is more popular
Yeah.
because it's more profitable and it's also more effective, and you can learn precisely what you want to learn. And for those of you out there who own companies, like everybody should be doing
Oh, thank
your program because you really dissect it and you teach the art and science of it.
Thank you.
And it's brilliant. And everybody needs to know what's in your program. And if they don't, if they're missing one piece of that, they're going to feel the pain of that for
Totally.
themselves or their companies. And it's very important to understand it. I'm still learning.
Yeah, we all are. It's always changing and evolving, which is
It just feels like toilet paper, like so much effort, and you just like every day, it's just like there's so much of it. And I guess I just wish there was just more meaning and purpose and education and
that's with everything, right? Like I think again, even with the advent of the internet, right? Of like, oh, there's this dark web. There's a lot of terrible things that can, and I think when we don't understand something or we don't know where it's going, it becomes even more frightening. Like we're seeing that right now with AI, and what if the robots take over the world, and then what happens then, and that consciousness. And for sure, like there's always going to be the fear, and there's always going to be what's the utility, and people that use it for both. And I think that that's really what it comes down to is how are we going to leverage this? And it's not going away. So how can we accept it and then find a more intentional way to move it forward? I agree with you, and how papers were considered such a negative thing because it took people out of conversation. And I think I watched some sort of programming on this in a documentary about how the newspapers were such a challenging thing at the time because it was thought to take people away from conversation. And then it became web browsing and like, oh, that's going to keep an AIM messaging and that's going to keep people from conversing. Well, now the way that we converse is just very different, and the access that we have is very different, and the people that we're conversing with is very different because we're no longer in our own microcosm, and we can be exposed to people that value different things. And so that with it creates a lot of controversy and a lot of contrast and a lot of negativity. But I think it's more about, and this is where it comes down to what's helpful and unhelpful. And I think what's really unfortunate is that we don't yet have the skills or the training or the understanding of how to communicate with each other where those conversations can actually lead to something else. Because right now it's just a downward spiral of you're wrong, well, you're wrong, well, you're wrong, well, you're wrong.
Exactly, and there's so much division, especially politically, and that
Yeah.
was what we found in the last couple of elections. It's like, how do we get a proper view of what's actually happening in the world?
Yeah.
Because I'm very selective about if I'm only listening to NPR, or I'm only listening to CNN, or if
Yeah.
I'm only listening to Fox News. It's
Right.
like I'm really not getting the full picture.
Right.
I mean, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and then the scary thing too with AI and just technology in general is like the amount of fake news. And like fake news will spread 6 times faster than regular news. Part of that is because it really leans into emotion, and people are too busy being outraged to actually fact check anything. So I feel like the biggest skill set that people are going to be able to leverage moving forward is discernment, and discernment about like what's true for them with their bodies, and what's true for them with their healing, and what's true for them and their and not even just true for them, but like what is factual, what is the right, like not right perspective, but what is the perspective that they're seeing and what else could it potentially be? And I think that there's going to be a lot of issues in that world if people don't really focus on how can I discern for myself what I'm looking at.
And it creates more education. I mean, it requires more education. People that I used to follow who I think had a lot of important opinions about health are now buried in Google. I have to use different search engines to even find their URL.
That's true.
And it's really crazy making for me, just as someone who's endlessly curious and wanting to know the 6 different views of elderberry, or any number of things that I'm interested in. I don't want anyone telling me that I can only look at certain websites because they follow a certain narrative, and it's actually getting worse, a lot worse. And so I worry sometimes about kids who are, stuck on processed foods, whose brains aren't even fully online. I mean, in a different way, like, neurologically, and then they're being influenced. And like, what does the future look like in these? It's just so necessary for people to wake up, get back to nature, use their phones productively, and move their bodies. So as a former Miss Nevada and an expert in all things attention engagement, and just the brilliant mind that you have, I love how you spoke about how you're like re-relating to your body and your body image. And I think that as women, it's just this never-ending thing.
It never ends. It's like dishes. It never ends. That's right. I have an existential issue with dishes. There's just always there. Always more to do. You always need to eat something, and then I have a dish.
Well, and I think that always need to eat something is the other part of the equation. It's like if you have an issue with any other substance, like you just leave that substance off the table. But food, we do have to eat it for our existence. Now, some people might say, well, you could be a breatharian or you could do something, but I don't think that's really healthy.
Yeah.
Some of my friends might disagree. I have a lot of health neurotic
As breatharians, where they just breathe?
Yeah, no water.
How long do they live?
Yeah.
Oh, many of them have lived quite a long time.
I thought that we couldn't survive without water after 3 days.
Well, apparently there's a thing called prana, and that does, it's really extreme. I don't recommend it at all.
How skinny are they?
Very skinny.
Are they anorexic?
That's a good question. Maybe they are.
Well, you know them, so are they?
Well, I mean, the definition of anorexia, I believe, is under 1,400 calories or 1,200 calories a day. So that would fall into that category, but I don't know. Maybe the DSM has changed.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've actually been in that world.
So do you think eating disorders are caused by family dynamics? Do you think it's caused by a dysregulation in brain chemistry? Do you think that it's because of ultra-processed foods? Like if you were to trace back the cases that you've worked with or that you've studied, what do you think the real source is?
I mean, there's so much research about the comorbidity between eating disorders and other types of mental disorders, and including depression and anxiety and bipolar. So we usually never see, again, research that I did a decade ago, you never see an eating disorder by itself. It's usually comorbid with depression. It's usually comorbid with anxiety. So that I think is very telling that there's other things that come into play to fix it. And then you usually also see environment be a problem, or that there's a controlling family dynamic, or there's something that's happening with food is being used for them as a form of control or release. And it might be the only thing in their life that they feel like they have control over, because the dynamic is so just all over the place, or there's abuse or erratic behavior or attachment styles. So I don't think it's just one thing, and I think that's what we're learning more and more. I mean, even we were talking about this. There's a great book called The Confidence Code, and these scientists did a bunch of research on just women having confidence. And they found through twin studies that even identical twins who grew up in the same environment would have very different resilient levels when it comes to different types of confidence. And there's like genetic markers within their DNA which would make them predisposed to have more or less confidence. So I think that there's probably a lot that we don't know about having predispositions to these types of behaviors that we're going to learn. I mean, we learn so much every single day. Where you were telling me something about how we recently found out, the brain detoxes during sleep. Mm-hmm. We recently found that out.
Yeah.
And isn't it funny? I think in the 1700s was when scientists were like, well, I think we've learned all there is to learn about the brain. And like, here it is, 2024. And only recently have women's bodies actually been studied when it comes to nutrition and physical wellness. Like that blew my mind to learn that women, even with a lot of popular weight loss programs or exercise regimens, it wasn't actually from studying women doing the things. It was, well, women are just smaller men, so let's have them do less reps. Let's have them do less weight, and that should be fine, when our hormones are completely different and our cycles are completely different, and we're it's just mind-boggling. And even, what is it, like tampon and pad companies only started using actual menstrual blood in research like last year. It's like, we are in the 2020s. What are we doing?
That's pretty shocking.
Yeah, so I think we're entering an age where science and technology, there's so much benefit. And yeah, it's scary. And I think there's also this incredible hearkening back, and you're kind of losing the movement on this of hearkening back to nature. And there's this whole other like subculture of people that want to get closer to nature and see that because there's so much demand and there's so much access all the time. You know, I've seen women that built companies in the 80s and 90s that they just like leave the office and no one could get a hold of them. And that would be their day, right? They go off and take meetings, and they come back, maybe answer some phone calls, and they go home at 5, and no one could contact them, and they'd have that space. And now our phones are with us all the time. And if we don't have our phones, we have our Apple Watches, which tell us when someone's calling or texting us at all times of the day. And if not, then we have it on our laptops. And if not, then our TV will tell us if someone's calling or texting us. And we've got 30,000 emails. So the amount of things that are on and asking for our attention, I think it's going to be so important, on top of discernment, for us to teach ourselves and teach the next generation skills to disconnect and how to rejuvenate, because it's always going to be such a demand on our time and our attention.
So well said. So well said. There's so many things I want to respond to inside of that.
I'm sure, yeah.
So many. So many. And I know that for Penelope's generation, the level of obesity is so much higher than it was for our mothers. Of course, I'm much older than you, but my grandmother, like, it was just not even heard of that you'd be obese. And they're trying to call it a genetic disorder now. They're trying to call it a disease that you have. Now, you're not obese. You're not allowed to say you are obese. You have to say you have obesity. And part of this change in language, and also kind of what we're up against for promoting healthy lifestyles, people are calling us fat phobic, which we're not. We just we're pro-health, because my mother died at 59 with severe obesity on her death certificate. Yeah. And, you know, Penelope was suicidal. And so, like, I wonder, like, the chicken or the egg, like, was it the anxiety? Was it the depression? You know, that was at the root of this.
Or was it social media?
Or was it social media? And we could debate it, but I do believe that, like, fundamentally, there was a time in your life, my life, and Penelope's life where we looked in the mirror and we loved ourselves. We were just joyous. We sang, and we were, like, imaginative, and we were just like, oh my gosh, this is just the greatest thing ever. Yeah. And then, like, one day around 11, we started to get critical. Like, oh, why does my eye look like this? And why does my mouth look like that? And why is my nose like this? And so we started to have that critical view of ourselves. And that's normal. It's a normal part of our development. But the coping mechanisms that we use, food, I'm just going to call it out. Like, food is a coping mechanism for the anxiety, for the depression, for the inability to sustain and withstand the fact that you are so different, which is beautiful and unique, but no one really told you that. Yeah. So, I mean, of course, our mothers hopefully told us that. I don't know if that's true, but my mother did. She's like, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words can never hurt me. Because I was made fun of. I was bullied because I was fat. And so were you, Penelope. And of course, I said that to you, and you were like, shut up,
the
Mom.
exact same thing.
You are so full of BS.
Well, it's interesting. And I when you were talking, the two thoughts came to mind. And one was, I wonder what is different in other countries, like in Europe, and how women are taught to relate to their bodies. And you guys have both spent extensive time. You've lived in France for a number of years.
Yeah, and Penelope was born there.
And I feel like French women, like my American view of French women, is they just so own and love their bodies. And there is a lot of body positivity there, but I think that the diet and the culture and the lifestyle is very different. And the food that, even when I went to Italy, like I have a gluten sensitivity, but I can go to Europe and I can have all the pasta that I want, which to me says it isn't actually about gluten. It's about the chemicals that we're treating the food with.
Exactly.
And you see these people all day eat pasta in every meal in Italy, and it's not a problem, which says to me it has more to do with, again, it's not the issue of pasta being the problem, it's where it's sourced from, which is its own interesting conversation. So yeah, I hear you. I think that there's so much that we could learn from other countries that have done this well, and for whatever reason we don't want to. And I think there's a narrative that's being pushed to not have us address those issues because that would hurt a lot of big businesses.
Absolutely. I was just listening to an interview by Calais Means. Calais Means, how do you pronounce it?
Callie means.
Calais Means, and he was saying if the American experiment fails, it'll be because we're sicker, fatter, more infertile, more depressed, more anxious, and just obese than we've ever been. And we're doing nothing about it. And when I say that, I'm talking about the sourcing.
Yeah.
And how far away we've gotten from the original
Makeup of food.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like the genetic modification, the herbicides, fungicides, pesticides, ultra-processed food, et cetera, et cetera.
And the life here is so convenient. Like in Europe, you have to walk everywhere. If you want
Yeah.
to go get a croissant, you walk to the croissant. If you want to go to, if you want to go to Italy and eat pasta, you walk to the restaurant. And then after the
I don't
restaurant,
remember
you
there
walk.
being that many fast food options.
No.
Yeah.
It's not like every corner you turn, you see a fast food restaurant. And it's
Right.
not convenient. Like you have to go to the post office. Amazon doesn't always come to your front door. You have to go to the place to pick it up.
That's why your dad likes fast food, because like it's maybe less common. I'd be like, no, we're not going to Burger King. And he'd be like,
funny.
A lot of people take the train in Europe everywhere, and then they walk to work and they walk back from work. They take the train, walk back home. Like their step count is probably way higher
Yeah.
than it's here.
yeah, and then they're also stricter about genetically modified food organisms.
And they actually,
Products you put into your beauty products.
Yes,
Yeah,
about
the
herbicides,
chemicals.
fungicides, pesticides.
I'm pretty sure they can't afford and don't want to pay for all the chemicals that America uses for their food.
I don't know if it's so much how if they can afford it. I don't think it's a priority, and I think they're aware of the future of their, Homo sapiens, the future of humanity, being adversely impacted by interrupting a natural cycle. I think that they honor and understand after thousands of years that they need to, be honest with nature, because nature is fierce.
And in Europe, you do not see like all the overweight people like wearing bikinis and like taking selfies of themselves and like promoting it and glorifying it. Like it's not okay. Like if you're overweight, like people there will tell you.
Well, you have to hide.
You have to hide. You don't really see those people. And it's so fascinating to me because it's not weird to be like, hey, go for a walk. It's not weird or fat phobic or diet culture to be like, hey, you should just go for a walk. Let's go for a walk together. Like, it's not weird to do that. It's super normal. And like, if you're overweight in Europe, it's like, there's a problem. Let's fix it like now. And like, families are very vocal about it.
Well, there's also socialized medicine in Europe. So when you are overweight, the burden to society is known. So it's almost considered selfish. Because if you have socialized medicine, everyone's paying into that system. And we know that if you are obese, your likelihood of getting diabetes and heart disease and Alzheimer's disease and all of the, cancer and all of the comorbidities is much higher. And so you're going to be more of a burden on society.
Yeah, and actually today you were talking about earlier how people who are anorexic would pass away, and they wouldn't say the cause of death was anorexia.
Yeah.
And today, they are now letting people die. People who die, they don't say it's because of obesity anymore. It's actually like not legal apparently to label it as obesity anymore. So when your mom died of obesity,
Well, she died of erupted appendicitis, but the third cause.
one of the causes of death is obesity. Today, they don't write that anymore. They're not legally allowed to write
Why do you think
that
that
it's one of the causes
why
of
is that?
obesity. Why do I think that is? I think it's probably because they don't want to, because that would mean that they would need to find a solution that stood outside of a pill or an injection, which they now have successfully made one. And we look at a lot of diseases like heart disease and all the things, heart attacks, all the causes, all these health problems that we have. We never really, doctors don't really just say, oh, look at your diet. And if they do today, now they're fat phobic. Now they're against diet culture. Now, oh, he told me, there are tons of people who make videos and they're like, oh, my doctor told me to just lose some weight. And that was the answer to my problem. And apparently that's a bad thing. But no, the truth is the problem usually is the weight. And we don't want to think that because that means we have to address that we have a problem that's underlying. But
Yeah, I do think that women, especially, are often judged for weight issues with doctors, and maybe there's other root causes that are going on. Like you see now more and more women being like, "Yeah, I went in because I was having all these symptoms, and I knew something was wrong with my body, and I was told by my doctor that I just needed to lose some weight," and then it turns out they had liver cancer or something, or it was their body recognizing that they had a type of cancer coming through, that was the weight was a symptom of a much graver illness. And I think that just goes back to, we even have a culture of doctors and medicine that don't really listen to the intuitive nature of women when we come in and say, hey, we're feeling this way, which then just creates this barrier to have any sort of discussion. I think, it's weight is always such a polarizing issue, because it makes people feel like, even me, like feeling like I have put on weight since when I was Miss Nevada. And it's like, well, yeah, of course I have. I'm now in my 30s and my lifestyle is very different. But there's always a worth that comes with that, or a feeling that my worth has been impacted based upon my weight. And so I can imagine that for a lot of people, and especially if they've tried certain things, or they feel like it's not supported by the rest of their family or the life that they have or the culture that's around them, we don't set people up to be successful here. We don't give them access to the right medicine or the right foods, or even cultures where that's a priority.
Well, our doctors they're not educated in nutrition.
Right.
They get one semester.
Right.
And you'd have to be an endocrinologist to understand the hormonal imbalances that may be causing a lot of the weight issues that we're finding today. And the hormones are becoming such an issue because our environment is so polluted, and how we're dealing with factory farming. So anyone who's eating animal products is being inundated with a lot of antibiotics and hormones that are pumping them up and causing massive imbalances. And it's very expensive to avoid that and eat grass-fed dairy products or raw dairy products if they're legal, or animals that are grass-fed and that are humanely raised.
Well, and it feels like the information is always changing, right? Because I went off dairy for that reason and was like, great, I'm going to do oat milk. I'm going to do almond milk.
And then you got the seed oils and the spike in blood pressure. I know. You really got to learn for yourself. The medical model is not set up for doctors to be able to support you with lifestyle change.
No.
And most of these diseases can be reversed with lifestyle change. But who are the people who are educating and who are supporting and holding accountable the populace? And that, it's never been a time. I think it's so fascinating. There's hundreds of thousands of health coaches that are trained and no jobs for them really, because the insurance companies haven't gotten involved. But I do believe that they are the bridge. They're the bridge for the sick care system towards a well care system. And I'm hopeful that we'll figure it out in this lifetime.
I hope that, and just in general, the medical model moves to preventative, because if that was the piece, I mean, that was what would create health and longevity, as if we could even focus on what are the things, even when it comes to like getting, what is it, mammogram is the only thing like medically as a female that we do that's preventative. Otherwise it's like we're waiting to see if you have something else wrong. And then that's, and I guess that's even not in the case for a mammogram, because like they're looking for cancer cells. So there isn't really stuff that we provide anyone on the front end to keep them healthy, right? It's, or even mentally, of how to prepare your mind to deal with something like social media.
Well, that's the point.
Yeah.
Is these mechanisms that hopefully our program is teaching people. And I'd love to see more social media, honestly, around this topic. How do you build those mechanisms? No one really teaches you how to cook. No one really teaches you how to cope with your emotions. Our families are too busy, mothers and fathers working full time or preoccupied with whatever. Schools aren't teaching this right now. There's no conflict resolution really embedded in the curriculum. Home economics is considered sexist. Your doctors, it isn't built into their system to teach you about these things. And most psychologists aren't really well equipped to teach you. So we really have to take full ownership of teaching ourselves emotional coping mechanisms and skills outside of food and drugs and sex and other things that people use.
Well, and it's interesting, you mentioned earlier about how you feel like, once you hit 11, 12, you start to have your own thoughts and reflections about your body. And I wonder if that comes a lot sooner. We're more unconscious about it.
Maybe.
There's a study that was done on why girls didn't like math. And what it was about it that, for a long time until very recently, and the push for STEM, right? And like a positive movement that let's get women involved in science and technology and engineering and math, that women were just like, oh, women are bad at math. Women don't want to do math. And when they did the study, they found what it really came down to was when girls were being taught by their elementary school teachers in 2nd and 3rd grade, the teachers, mostly women, right, at the time, at that age group, are saying things like, I hate math or I don't like math. And that was programming these young children to think, okay, as a female, I probably shouldn't like math either. And so there's been such a push to change that narrative because it's not true. And like girls aren't inherently bad at math. It's not a genetic thing, right? But it was something that we were exposed to so early on that created this lifelong distaste for doing math problems. And I think that there's probably a lot of things in our lives that are that way.
Yeah, I mean, opens up a whole other topic. I mean, Penelope, remember you loved math until it was taught to you in a standardized way. I mean, yeah, you loved math.
I did. I think I was in the top class, and like I got moved up a level because I was so good at it. And then I went to public school, and I skipped every math class.
Well, actually, hold on. Let's get the whole story. I'll make it brief. But she came to me. She's like, Mom, my math teacher sucks.
Oh.
And I said, oh, well, really? And she's like, and I no longer want to attend math class because he's such a bad teacher.
Oh,
and I said, well, Penelope, I'm not sure that's possible. And I said, but, why don't you go ahead and advocate for that with your principal and see, what you can arrange for yourself, so to say. And she did. She went to the principal. Oops. You went to the principal and you were able to negotiate 15 minutes of math class, and then you got to leave.
And go do the rest with a tutor in a completely different building, my favorite building.
Yeah.
What was it about him that you didn't? Was it just his style of teaching?
I mean, it was him. He was bland, but he.
I didn't like the way that he.
It's like pasta without sauce, like uncooked pasta without any seasonings. Nobody wants to eat that.
So yeah, it was how it was presented to you that mattered. It was
also like textbook slap on the desk, paper slap on the desk, math problem on the whiteboard. What is that?
Well, you're very practical, Penelope.
That's like a museum of numbers, basically.
horrible. How would you learn math before then?
Way more fun. Like, what would we do? We did fun things like we'd use like colors, and we'd use trains and cars, and like just like all these more
and you would even use it in theater, and you would use it in gardening, and you would figure out like how many degrees for your baby chickens to hatch, or you would you would learn about how to make this dress and how many inches of fabric you needed and whatnot. So yeah, so we've got a little visitor here. This is Lulu. She's in the. She's like, let's go out, guys. This is enough.
This is a lot.
Yeah.
I would like to do something else now. Yeah, she is so ready.
Yeah, I get it. I know. Boo.
That's really interesting, though. I love that you essentially graded your teacher's performance on the mechanisms for teaching you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And therefore, I never saw the teacher after a while. I just stopped going completely. I got away with it. The teacher would avoid me in the hallways, and I'd avoid them, and it was a very interesting friendship.
Yeah, I bet.
Well, do you think that your mom helped you to establish this connection of love and self-worth with your body, this transformation that you've experienced over the years? And based on that, regardless of whether it was good or bad, right or wrong, wanted you to leave our viewers and our listeners with a little bit of wisdom about how they can better relate and interact and engage with their environment.
Interact with their environment.
Specifically on social media, since that's like one of your areas of expertise.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. So I was like, interact with their environment. Oh, gosh.
That's a big question.
It's a lot of things.
Sorry.
It's okay. I think everyone's parents help to shape you and your relationship with your body, positive or negative. I don't think, I never heard her talk poorly about herself. Yeah, I think the cool thing about my mom was because she had this really illustrious career, and I got to go back and see photos of her from that time. And there was also stories that she would tell me about moments in her career that had been kind of traumatic for her. And I think it was her sharing those. And I remember when she told me one of these stories, it was her sharing that story that actually really impacted me, and being like, wow, like why did that happen? Or what would you have done differently then? And it ended up then having an impact on her. And so I think that, parents and children can obviously have impact on each other all the time. And that was really powerful to be able to have her share those vulnerabilities and kind of the behind the scenes of what you saw in these final photos, and then what might have been happening with the photographers, or what might have been happening with getting the work, or and that was really powerful. As far as interacting with your environment, I think it really depends upon what it is that you're wanting for yourself and what you're struggling with, and also just knowing where those boundaries are. We've talked a lot about boundaries in the past couple days. I think that especially in a world where there is unlimited information now at our fingertips, it's not regulated, right? Like the platforms do the best that they can, but they miss a lot of things. Sometimes they censor things that they shouldn't, and it's kind of a catastrophic world of, even now with AI, how do you know if something's actually real versus been generated for someone to say something that they didn't actually say, or doing something they didn't actually do, or creating an article that didn't actually happen. I think it's so important for you to be aware of how engaging on certain things impacts you, and where are you spending your time, and is it helpful or is it hurtful? And I have to ask myself that all the time when it comes to engaging with comments, or even on my own videos, of like, yes, it would be helpful for the video for me to engage on this, and I know that based upon everything that I've done in content creation, that engaging creates more engagement. However, is that engagement helpful to my state to be able to create more? Is this engaging helping me to stay in a positive place about myself? Or is this engaging just like putting salt on a wound that isn't going to fix itself right now? And so it's probably better for me to remove myself from this equation, because even though I feel like I've won a lot of battles with trolls, at the end of the day, the only person that really gets taxed is you, because you're the creator. And so you have people that are destroyers and that are destroying the creations, and then you have people that are creating. So you can consume or you can create, and you can try to battle the destroyers, but at the end of the day, they don't have anything to lose, right? All you do have to lose is your time and your energy and your belief in yourself, and to what end? Right? Like, what do we need to prove to this person in this moment that's so important that it's worth taking you away from the rest of your day, the rest of your week, or the rest of your plan to go and create something for yourself? And especially in a world, I mean, Taylor Swift is an amazing example of this, because she has everything in the world right now. She's a billionaire. She's broken every record. She has the biggest and most powerful fan base, and she probably has the most haters. And I think about this often when I look at really successful people. The people that are doing the best and doing the most usually also have an occult following of people that just want to see them fail and will do anything to make them fail if they can. But a lot of the times they get to that level, they can't be touched.
I don't know. I mean, Jesus Christ, Bob Marley,
okay.
Kurt Cobain,
All right, yes.
Janis Joplin.
I guess you're right. Yeah, I stand corrected. I'll back on
Rajneesh.
that. But I will say that, again, it's usually on the path to greatness that we accumulate the people that want to see us fail.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I think it is kind of a mark if you're doing something well, if there's other people that don't think that you're that big of a deal, or you shouldn't be famous, or you shouldn't be making an impact. And I love to respond with, I need to come up with a term for it, but it's like deflecting positivity, where, like, for example, someone will say something like I'm currently building my following on YouTube, and I'm doing it primarily through YouTube Shorts. I'm not making long form content. It's an experiment. It's very new for me. I've built followings on Facebook. I've built followings on TikTok. We've helped clients across all platforms, but YouTube never been something I've invested in. So I'm talking about how to get views on your content. And so it's really interesting, because the primary comment that I get back is, who the hell are you to talk about getting views on your content? You've got X number of followers on YouTube. Like, what a quack. And it's like, oh, I could internalize that. And sometimes I do, because like, it is a new frontier for me. But what I'll end up saying is like, yeah, well, you're right. I mean, I've done 1 billion views here, and I've had 850,000 followers here, and I've helped clients 250x their results there. But if none of that's valuable to you because it's not on this platform, totally understand. And you also bring up a great point. that progress isn't linear. And so I can actually use them to showcase a point and something about what I care about as well. And so it deflects the hate and prevents really good value.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Answers the
Are you kidding
question,
me? It was
but-
so wise and so beautiful.
But,
Yeah, and so helpful. And I'm sure the people listening will garner tremendous value and depth from it.
thank you.
Yeah, it's been such an honor to spend this time with you.
Oh, I love spending time with you guys. Thanks
Yeah.
for having me. This is so fun.
I always learned so much.
Oh,
And you're also, as you can tell, an incredible speaker.
thank you.
So if people want to have you on their stage or connect with you directly, the best place to find you.
Tensioneers.com.
All right.
Tension, EERS.com. The engineers of attention.
The engineers of attention.
And if you want our blueprint, again, it's attentioneers.com/blueprint for our viral video blueprint.
And we'll put that in the description, in the show notes. And anything you want to say, Penelope, before we wrap?
Just thank you so much
Oh,
for
thank you,
sharing
guys.
your heart and your honesty.
Oh, I love you guys. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for having me.